Oh, here we go. Great. I am a techno peasant, admittedly. Um, and if it wasn't for Gemma, I would be lost entirely. Great. So, Matthew, what brought you here and what do you hope to learn?
Greetings, my name is Matthew LaFleur. I use he, him pronouns. I'm actually statewide. I pretty much, if I'm not from insurance, I'm in legislative. If I'm not from in legislative, I'm in environment. If I'm not from environment, I'm in medical across the state of Vermont. I'm in a complexity, technicality of the state of Vermont's system where people try to avoid because it's too overly complicated. What brought me here today is to collaborate. What I want out of this is collaboration and efficiency through all party members of the state. So we can work together, collaborate together. So we're not, reinventing the wheel in our subcommittees or in our silos. We're trying to break down silos so we can be more inclusive, diversity, equity, and a sense of belonging of why we do this, for Vermont citizens and residents that live here. For me, it's just to it's just another piece of the pie that I'm doing across the state is collaborating, networking, and making sure the message is efficient and more effective for all of us that live here.
Great.
Thank you very much.
All right. And VTRC stands for,
Vermont Truth and Realization Commission. I'm actually now a member of the state of Vermont that does the policy works to make sure that the policy includes all of us, not the ones that can.
okay.
Thank you.
All right. Next on my screen is, I'm going to go down, Deetra.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm a policy analyst with the Public Utility Commission, working on the clean heat standard, and I'm really interested in getting a more genuine public view of this process, how people feel they can participate, and hopefully making this a more accessible avenue versus our more traditional feedback processes like EPUC and filing comments there. So looking forward to the feedback.
Great. Joanne.
Hi, I'm Joanne O'Connor and I live in Manchester. And I was on our energy committee for a while, and I'm just very, very interested in getting off fossil fuels and making a better environment for all of us. So I try to get involved in anything related to energy and renewables. And I'm looking forward to being part of one of our town's task forces that's forming up now for housing. So I want to sort of marry the housing crisis with the energy crisis and marry those together and make sure we're providing the housing with renewable energies mandated for those housing. So I'm looking forward to learning what I can from everybody on the call.
All right. Thank you. Steve.
Hi there, I'm Steve Meyer. I'm with the Climate Economy Action Center of Addison County, and I'm interested in learning more about the clean heat standard today and how it might impact folks around the state in different ways and places. So thanks for doing this.
Okay. Tom Neuer. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
It's one of many different interpretations I've heard, Curtis. It's not an easy name for sure. Nauer is how I say it. So, hi everyone. Tom Nauer. I work at the Public Utility Commission, and kind of like Deirdre, I'm here to hear from folks who are interested in this project. You know, what the program means to them, what it can do for them. And I really liked what Matthew said, you know, making sure our messaging is efficient and accessible. That's part of our job, is to take the legislation and put it into a program that is accessible and understandable to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Jeremy.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Gildrian. I work at Rutland Regional Planning Commission, and I'm here really just to listen to what people have to say. What my interest in the clean heat standard is thinking about how it applies to the planning work that I do in the region that I'm in and how it impacts people.
Okay. See, next is Linda.
Hi, thank you. I'm Linda Gray. I'm with the Town Energy Committee. I'm from Norwich. And I personally have made many of the changes that we hope the clean heat standard will induce people to do, of weatherized, gone electric for heating, et cetera, and transportation. And I am very interested because as an energy committee person, I've spent a lot of time talking to neighbors about making these changes. And so I really want to, I'm hopeful that the clean heat standard will be something that will, make it more affordable, make people way more interested in doing all these things. And so I just want to follow the process and see how it goes, because I hope to be in a position where I'm letting a lot of my neighbors know about it.
All right, thank you. Next column down is Dominique.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dominic Gotti. I am a fellow with the Vermont Public Utility Commission, working on the Clean Heat Standard, and I'm very excited to hear some perspectives on what this has looked like from the outside and what we should be paying special attention to that might not be at the front of our radar right now.
Mhm. Thank you. Gretchen.
Hi, Gretchen Elias. I live in Montpelier. I'm a community member and climate advocate. I was a strong supporter of this when it was in the process of going through the legislature. So I'm excited to hear how the implementation process is starting to go.
Great. Joanne. Joanne Miller. We have two Joannes amongst us today.
Johanna, but good to be
Johanna.
here. Johanna Miller, lead the Energy and Climate Program at the Vermont Natural Resources Council. We work a lot on state policy, and we were supportive of advancing this bill. I also work a lot at the community level, helping to coordinate the statewide network of town energy committees. I see many familiar faces with great ideas like Matthew just shared. So I'm here today just to really listen and learn. I think that, our interest has been helping to move Vermonters off of 100% imported dirty fossil fuels that are exacerbating the climate crisis, and instead help them access and afford cleaner, more cost-effective energy solutions. So I'm here to really hear and understand people's individual situations so that the experts at the PUC, the TAG, the Equity Advisory Group, can design a program that delivers on the core tenets of the statute, which is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions equitably and affordably, because the status quo is not serving us well. So look forward to listening and participating. Thank you so much.
Okay. Norm. Hello, Norm. Are you there? Okay, we'll come back to you. Ashley.
Hi there. I'm in a shared space and I can't turn my screen on. I'm sorry about that. I'm glad to be here. It's tough to get to meetings like this, working and so, and I guess, my biggest concern, I was not a supporter of the AHA. I think it's a really convoluted way to achieve something that it won't ultimately achieve, and that is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions equitably and affordably. Big concern of mine is that it entirely ignores wood burning, which is worse than fossil fuels in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and is very detrimental to human health. So you have this strange disconnect where the state of Vermont Attorney General has joined a lawsuit against the EPA because the EPA's regulations of wood burners do not protect human health. So I see a real equity issue here where the state is pushing wood burning as a clean energy source. Here you have something that's both harming human health and producing more greenhouse gas emissions even than fossil fuels. And yet Vermont is claiming that it's green energy. And that just, the dishonesty there and the disconnect is just astounding to me. You know, this is well-established science.
All right, I
States
think
all
we'll,
around us recognize this, and I just don't understand it. And I don't know where people like me who are really concerned about this, where this concern goes. I feel like I'm talking to a brick wall.
okay.
And so thank you for holding the meeting. And I'm not sure where these concerns end up at the end of the day. And I'm sorry if I sound frustrated, it's because I am.
I think there's a level of frustration across the board. So I will respect your point of view, and it'll be integrated into the overall conversation as we delve into it. Stephen Dotson.
Yes, one second, just trying to, there we go. Hi, I'm Stephen Dotson. I work for the town of Brattleboro in the planning department as the sustainability coordinator. And I'm really interested in this because I see the potential for this legislation to provide towns with the right kind of information that they need in order to pursue their climate goals and actually measure the progress of their whole communities. A lot of what I run into in my work is that I cannot accurately obtain data on what fossil fuels are being used in my community without surveying every single consumer. And that's private data. I'm hoping that as part of this legislation, what is going to come out is the ability to obtain anonymized aggregate data at the town and county level, because that will unleash our ability to actually measure our emissions and our fossil fuel usage and improve that. So it's currently prevented just through a lack of data and a lack of being able to get that data. But I see this legislation as being able to solve that problem, and I want to make sure it does. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see here. We have Jean.
Hi there. Thanks for having this meeting. I am joining Steve Meyer as part of the Climate Economy Action Center of Addison County. I'm also an architect and have been working on this kind of energy work for a long time. And I guess my major focuses are how do we equitably help people of all incomes make the transition to fossil fuel free living, including their homes and their transportation and everything else. And how do we develop the workforce to do that at the speed that we need to make this happen? And I have seen, from everybody I've talked to, this is one of the major issues, and I know there's been some work on it, but the pace that we need to be going doesn't seem like is really being addressed. Thank you.
All right. Annette.
Hello, I'm Annette Smith with Vermonters for a Clean Environment. I attended the first of these meetings, and I'm interested in seeing how this goes. I've been monitoring the process at the Public Utility Commission, and especially interested in seeing how the public outreach portion of this is being attended by average Vermonters and not people like me associated with an organization. So that is why I'm here. Thank you.
I can assure you that you are an average Vermonter.
Well, I'm outside today because it's just too beautiful to be inside.
Okay. Linda. Did we already do you, Linda? Okay. Then Luce.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm on the technical advisory group for the Clean Heat Standard. And I'm a, Vermonter. I'm also on the select board, and I would like to see this succeed and not be a huge administrative lift, which it is quite complicated at this point, which is taking a lot of work to get to where we need to go. And I also am here just to listen to what people have to say, because of the timing of the meetings. Sometimes not everybody can make these 3-hour meetings. So I'm curious as to what everybody is thinking. Thank you. And I'm an engineer by trade, so I'm more into the technical parts of the act.
Okay. I can assure you, we will not be together for 3 hours. We're just 90 minutes. Matthew.
Hi there, I'm Matthew Baker Poole. I'm a thermal energy program specialist with the Department of Public Service working on the Clean Heat Standard, and I'm attending because I want to see the facilitation of public engagement in the rulemaking process.
Great. Jeremy.
Oh, I went.
You already went?
Yeah.
Let's see, who's left here? Christine.
Hi, my name is Christine Peterson. I work for the Vermont Department of Public Service in the Consumer Affairs and Public Information Division. So we communicate with Vermont consumers about energy issues in a variety of ways. So this fits into that.
Okay, good. And then Melissa. Melissa, are you with us? Okay. Erin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Hicks Tibbles. I'm a policy analyst at the Vermont Public Utility Commission working on the Clean Heat Standard. And I am interested in hearing from all of you as individual Vermonters, under what conditions you are able to participate in the energy transition. Are there things that make this work well for you, and are there things that are barriers?
Great, thank you. Let's see. I think Norm has checked out. Okay, Gemma, why don't you introduce yourself just briefly?
There, now everything's on. Hi, I'm Gemma Seymour. I am the Special Projects Coordinator for Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity. And that really just means that I handle all the administrative, technical, and events planning for Vermont Partnership. Anything that Curtis isn't doing is what I'm doing.
Anything that I'm not doing, I can't do. That's why we have Gemma.
I am also an environmental and equity advocate in the state of Vermont. I've been living here for 10 years now. And as a renter, I have particular concerns as to how the way the law was written is going to affect people who rent rather than people who own. But I do have to say that the bill was written the way that it was written, and the bill requires us to do certain things. And regardless of how we feel about how the bill was written, we have to move forward with it as required by law. The Public Utilities Commission has to come up with a means to implement this law. And that's why we're all here, to talk about how that's going to happen. Thanks.
Great. So let's start with asking ourselves, actually Erin's question, which is, under what conditions can you imagine yourself being involved more deeply with clean heat? Just leave it open for, just raise your hand or, okay, Matthew?
The more we can be involved with the clean heat is to understand the language of where it's coming from. And my concern is to add, is the plain language that we're not using throughout the state of Vermont. We're using college means ways of understanding. And I'm going to use myself as an example. I don't learn that way. I'm neurodivergent, and we got to understand other people's learning capacities. And like you said, the big problem is, how does this language get translated to the communities out there? And if we're not using plain language, we're at a loss. And this is why I say it's that language. It needs to be interpreted in a way that people can get it. Not everybody has PhDs in his room, and we got to understand. We got to respect that. And for me, it's networking, also, and collaborating with other networks that do the same exact thing or similar, so you can get the gist of the whole picture of what next needs to happen. And for me, it's like, to be able to get to know this, to understand this, you gotta actually say it in a way where you can really understand it, and that begins with plain language and making sure that's accessibility and accommodation for all that can understand what you're trying to say. Thank you very much.
How many other folks on the call find the Act 18, the language, cumbersome? And if so, in what areas? Johanna.
Well, I guess what I would offer is that, I mean, oftentimes complex public policies are complicated, and the bill itself is complex, and the effort is complex, because we're talking about, for the first time ever, regulating a sector of our economy, the fossil fuel heating sector. So it's a big lift, but it's not. So I guess I would just argue that we don't need to be experts, like the public doesn't need to be experts in the policy or in the statute. But what we do need is to hear from the public about what their unique situation is, so that the experts, the technical advisory group, the equity advisory group, other experts, the legislative branch, can craft a policy that responds to people's unique circumstances. So I mean, we have performance standards. We've long had performance standards. We have them in the automobile sector. The reason our vehicles are more efficient is because we've required the auto manufacturers to make cars more efficient. And this is a performance standard for the heating sector. Now we're asking fossil fuel heating sectors to figure out ways to require them to help their customers cut costs with a variety of different solutions. So same with appliance efficiency standards. And I don't think the public were experts in the vehicle or the appliance efficiency standards. And I would just argue that they probably don't have to be. The public needs to add their voice about what is their unique situation, what direction do they want Vermont to go in terms of the different kinds of strategies that we should be helping, or solutions, heating solutions that we should be helping Vermonters afford. So I guess I think it's important to make sure, as we're using these moments of opportunity, that we're really hearing from, like, people don't need to be experts. I think that's daunting. And I think that we really just need to have the experts design a program that can serve all Vermonters as best as possible, recognizing that the status quo is deeply imperfect, super high cost, and deeply dirty. So the goal is to move people and transition away from dirty fossil fuels strategically and thoughtfully, without having to be an expert in the policy. That is what that's the way I view it.
So if the general public's not involved in the technical aspects of the legislation, why solicit comments from the public at all?
Oh, we should be hearing from the public about what is their unique situation. Like how do we create a program that serves a low-income renter? How do we create a program or help fossil fuel heating providers offer solutions that meet different people where they are?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be hearing from the public. Believe me, I think public engagement in this moment is really is really important. We need to be hearing from people, but I just don't want, I think it would be overwhelming to ensure that people have to understand the statute and what a clean heat standard is before they can add value to the conversation to inform the shape and design of a clean heat standard.
Great.
Sorry, Linda was next, so maybe I'll defer.
Yeah, Linda.
Yes, I just wanted to endorse the direction that Johanna's comments go, and say that I feel that that I notice as I have spent a lot of time over the years talking to people in my town, trying to convince them to weatherize and to electrify, etc. And I notice, particularly in the last several years, that people really do want to do that, but like they don't know how, or they feel sometimes like cost is a barrier. So what I think the public, the most useful information that you could get from people who would never be able to serve on a technical advisory committee because they just don't know the details. But you can try to find out from people what actions would they like to take for their homes or their apartments, and what are the barriers that they see. So I think that's the information that you need from the public, and feed that into the different the mechanisms that we can set up for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Who is this? Is that Jeremy? No. Ashley. Oof. I need a new set of glasses.
I hear you there. Yeah, I think lack of public understanding of the bill is what got us into this mess. And keeping the public in the dark with regard to health harms around a heating source that we're calling clean and that we're promoting and that we're providing incentives for, I think is unconscionable. And I don't think that the public should be obligated to sort of get into the weeds on the bill. But unfortunately, because I think there's such a lack of understanding of it, that's where we're at. People think that wood is healthy and clean, and it simply isn't. And I think that when that's being promoted and incentivized, and that's therefore the thing that you can afford, that's really an equity issue. That's a real problem.
Mm. And how does that relate to, just in terms of lack of understanding?
I think I heard the sentiment that really the public doesn't need to understand, that really the public just needs to kind of weigh in and report on kind of where they're at in terms of their needs and financial status and so forth. And I really disagree. I think the public needs to be as knowledgeable as they can about this. The state isn't being honest. And unfortunately, I think the public needs to really increase their understanding of the bill, and it shouldn't be that way. I think it's really unfortunate, and it really bothers me.
Mm. Just to play devil's advocate for a moment here, how much does the general public know about any legislation that comes out of Montpelier?
We should be able to count on our leaders to protect our health. That's a basic requirement of any elected official. So yes, we should be able to count on them to provide that, at least that level of protection, any public official at any level of government.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Joanne.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts in regard to what Johanna was saying. I think one of the things for communicating once this bill is real and, communicating with the public about it is all of the rebates. I think, the fact that there's so much, well, I don't know how much, but there is money out there to help people convert and do these things that they need to do for their homes and themselves and so forth. So I think and I think they do a good job of that, putting those rebates out, but maybe when they communicate the law, they can, go right into all the rebate information that's attached to some of these programs that will be helpful in that way. And the other thing I just want to say is, I know I hear, and it's probably not accurately being conveyed by some folks, but the cost, it's going to be threatening people and putting fear into people that it's going to cost too much, and it's going to cost, more than what they're paying now, and don't go for it. And so I guess the messaging of that too, in that it's it's going to be so cost effective in the long run that message has to get out there as well, I think, to folks. So
Okay. So do you see a difference between the cost for someone who rents as opposed to the cost for a landlord or a business?
I don't know. I don't know if it's the I suppose a landlord would take it a different, I don't know. I don't know how that would work for renters versus businesses.
All right, we'll double back to that question a little bit later on. Okay, Annette.
So I'm going to speak from my own personal perspective. I live off grid with solar. I have for more than 30 years in Vermont. There actually is no electricity running along my road, which is the reason I live off grid. And my concerns about the clean heat standard are that I rely on propane for my refrigerators and my kitchen stove, and I have a non-electric furnace in my basement that's fueled by propane. I heat the main part of my small house with wood, and I do not see, and I have changed out the windows in my house, I've insulated. I do not see anything in the clean heat standard where credits can be earned that is going to enable me to make use of any of it. And I think this goes to the complexity of the law that has to do with who owns the credits. And my biggest concern right now is that my small family-owned propane company is going to go out of business. And we're going to be stuck with the big companies that are known to be price gouging in this area. So I think I speak for a lot of rural Vermonters. I mean, there is no alternative to propane, and I can't believe I'm in the position of advocating for propane. But this is something that is fundamental to rural life in Vermont, and without any alternatives, and there's no way I'm going to get a pellet stove that has a fan that runs all night. There's no way I can get a heat pump that's going to run all night. When you're running a real renewable energy system, you shut everything off at night if you're dependent on solar, because all you do is drain the batteries if you're running anything that draws electricity at night. And so this whole idea that we're going to convert to a renewable energy system based on solar and batteries ignores nighttime, it ignores winter. If I didn't have a gasoline generator to back up when the sun doesn't shine from mid-October or November through January or February, I'd be in big trouble. So I think these are the kinds of things that I hope people who are in this meeting will share, is what are your challenges? Because I think I do understand the legislation in that it is extremely complicated, and having followed the technical advisory group meetings and seeing the struggle over the topic of credit ownership and who actually is going to own the credits, I just think it's very poorly done and placed us all in a position of having to try and implement something that is looking to me to be nearly impossible.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that we are already having a lot of people doing what's being required by the legislation. I just wish we could put all our energy into weatherization at this point. So thank you. Those are my comments.
Okay. Stephen.
I just wanted to kind of offer that I've thought that this this legislation should really also tie into and think about the impact that energy storage and battery deployment could have for situations like what we just heard. Someone who's off the grid may be able to generate some of what they have, but may not have the storage capability that fossil fuels offer. If we can get batteries out as part of this same effort to decarbonize our heating fuels, we will be building resilience for exactly those kinds of populations. So I think we need to incorporate that as a supportive measure that could make the rest of this work. And we are home to one of the pilot projects with Tesla and the power walls and all of that. I know we lifted the cap on how many can be deployed, but the waiting list is 2 years or more, I think, at this point to get one still. That would go a long way to mediating the problem we just heard a little bit about, which I do think is a real concern for a lot of people.
Okay. So how would you design a program around storage, around energy storage? What
I'm
kind of
still not clear about how this program is designed and if it actually is doing what I think it's doing. So I would say that it could be part of a credit program in some factor. If you're able to store electricity and you're using it for heat, maybe you could get an additional percentage of credits or some sort of incentive. But I'm not sure how this works to begin with. And I just, a question for the group, is there going to be a time where new information is presented or we can have questions answered by someone who does understand? I'm especially looking for an answer to what I brought up when I introduced myself around the data that would come out of this program and how that could help towns actually set and track and advance their own emissions goals.
Yes, this will work its way up the bureaucracy. But I'm not a clean energy heat expert. But
Is there anyone else on the call who could speak to that question?
Is there anyone else? Okay.
I would just say it's been a concern of mine also, Stephen, because like I said, I'm a select board member and I am concerned on larger municipal buildings and school buildings, how this will affect the cost of energy. And we all seen our school budgets go sky high this year. So we haven't gotten to large users yet in the, looking at this act. And that's a big piece of this that we're not really thinking about right now. Everyone's focused on residential, but what happens to our large users like schools, that the technology is not quite there to replace all these oil or propane boilers. So it's ongoing conversation.
So just in terms of dovetailing onto what Stephen and actually a couple of others have mentioned, you have some ideas for new programs. We don't know if those programs are in fact viable yet, or we have the data to substantiate whether or not those programs would really have an impact. Thinking about energy storage, thinking about the data, and how data is generated and how that gets back to the general public and or town policymakers as needed. Weatherization came up in terms of maybe increasing dollars for weatherization or increasing the promotion of weatherization programs. Are there any other programs that you can think of?
One of the things that I am very interested in is thermal energy networks. And those are something that can be put in mostly new construction, but new schools, new housing. These energy networks are so interesting. I've been looking into them on my own and understanding it better. And seems to me that that is one thing for the larger, even colleges, universities. They've got these things, thermal networks underground that are working, and you can just keep expanding on them. So that's a topic that I think, would be very appropriate for why some of these bigger networks would use, how these networks would be used in renewable energies in these projects.
Okay. Let's see here. Linda, are your hand still up? Yep.
Yes, I wanted to make this suggestion in terms of trying to get public input. I'm a fan of deliberative polling, and it seems to me, I recall, and it's got to be at least 20 years ago, I believe it was the Public Service Department did something like that, and the basic sketch of it is that you kind of have have a group of people gathered together. You get some feedback from them on a particular list of questions. You share some actual facts on the situation, and then you poll them again to get their reaction. And what I would suggest in the context of the clean heat standard is if you can end up doing some presentation that outlines where we are currently in terms of the thermal sector emissions in Vermont, and some of the details about how that arises, and then once you're at the stage where with the clean heat standard you have at least a sketch of how it might function once it was in place and implemented, that you could outline that to people and get their feedback about it. So I want to suggest that, like, a session like this, I have to say, is not all that good for getting feedback because, like, none of us, unless we've been on any of the committees working on the rulemaking, we don't know any of the details about it. And so I would say get to the point where you have some sketch, share that, and try to get feedback with people, having already given them a very solid understanding of what the issue is that we're trying to make changes on.
Okay. So then would you suggest then sort of a broad-based public information campaign on clean heat before doing the polling?
I wouldn't necessarily say a campaign, but I would say if you're seeking feedback from a group of people, you have to give them some information so they're like, you could consider them at least somewhat informed about the situation. Then you share with them a plan to make some changes, and then you get their feedback about that. And then you might get some improvements to the plan.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jean.
Yeah, so well, I'm hearing a number of things about people saying, we don't know how to do this yet. And well, maybe this only works for new buildings. And I think the information is out there at the national level, at the state level, that we really do know how to make those transformations with, moderate weatherization works, programs along with heat pumps. And it's just a matter of getting the information out there, getting the workforce out there, and doing the planning and making it happen. And I think it's possible, but I think the supports, the financial supports to make it possible for people to actually go ahead and make it reasonable financial idea for them is the biggest thing that I see lacking right now. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Matthew.
What's lacking is, to answer to Stephen's question about, the data, which we need to take that very seriously, is we have usually government, other states, which they do, have government entities, basically members, that are by the government. They basically do data and research while in session. That's their job. Vermont does not have these type of individuals that could do that data. We're running on 10 years of old data, which makes it very concern of mine, because it's like malpractice. You don't want that in a hospital using 10 years of old data. That could get someone injured pretty badly. But as I was saying forward, I think, to me, I say yes to have that education campaign. Education is everything in Vermont, but also making that education plain language friendly. Like I said, individuals that I, interact with don't understand what we're doing or don't want to know what we're doing because we're so technically complicated in our way of work, to the point that we're turning them away. We're turning prospects, individuals that want to do the work, away because we're basically talking like professors, and we should be actually become humanized, centralized systems and talk at least like me and you like to be treated, to be talked with, And like I said, plain language is everything. If we can't have the individuals to understand what we're talking about, then we all lose together. And I'm seeing that across the state, and it's a very big concern of mine. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Jean. Can't hear you. Jean? Oh, not Jean, Johanna.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I agree that plain language and broad and deep engagement is really important. And I also think that there's a moment in time where this policy is aligning with new federal incentives and programs through the Inflation Reduction Act and otherwise. So it offers another opportunity to make sure that people are aware of the different supports they can get to move off of fossil fuels for heating, which is, again, what this is, as we know, this policy is intended to do. And there's a new calculator that Rewiring America has worked with Efficiency Vermont to Vermontify, so that people can put in their information, and depending on where you live and who your utility is and your income, you can see what might be available to you. And then if a clean heat standard did move forward, your fossil fuel heating provider would have to help you do more or access those incentives. So there's a lot of resources out there that could be useful for the education and engagement that we're gonna need. And again, everyone's situation is unique. My 100-year-old house here in downtown Montpelier, we don't have fossil fuels in our home anymore. We largely rely on 3 cold climate heat pumps. And everyone's situation is different. I mean, Annette has described her situation. Not very many Vermonters live off the grid, and so she might not be able to get as many of those incentives, but the majority of Vermonters are grid connected. And so there's huge amounts of incentives out there. And I just want to note that this is a moment of potential alignment to help communities leverage and access those incentives for things like weatherization and heat pump out water heaters and cold climate heat pumps. So I'm going to drop this in the chat, this calculator, so you can have it for your community. You can have your community embed it on your municipal website if you're interested, but you can play around and see what incentives could be available to you, your neighbors, your grandma, etc.
So to what extent do you think incentives are underutilized?
I mean, I think, when you're talking about heating equipment, which is oftentimes a large capital investment, often made in a moment of crisis, I think incentives are underutilized for heating systems because it's a huge investment. And we've helped Vermonters make that investment over the course of time by radically subsidizing fossil fuels through our, US tax codes and incentives for fossil fuel companies. And, we've externalized the costs of those fossil fuels, and that's creating and exacerbating the climate crisis. And now we're trying to realign that system in a way that works for Vermonters. And so, but I think, to your question, I think incentives are in this arena often underutilized, largely because new heating systems are a major capital investment, and they, again, often made under duress. So this is where the work of the regional planning commissions is so important, where they're working with their communities to help people understand and plan for making capital investments, and helping landlords, think about, instead of when they have to make an investment in their rental unit, instead of locking into a 30 or 40-year-old fossil fuel boiler, making some sort of investment in a heat pump system or some other thermal energy network system, which is about to be enabled. So I think your question is complex, but I think there's
So let me tease out.
opportunity.
Let me tease out two things. One is, you talk about capital investment for homeowners, where they get to, the return on investment might happen 5 or 10 years down the road. But for a landlord that is doing a capital investment, the increase in their costs are going to pass on to the renters. So how does the act help renters that are paying their heating bills?
I mean, landlords will be able to access some of these incentives too. So having some sort of engagement strategy with landlords so that they can, be thinking about that, and also get some financial resources to support them helping make non-fossil fired investments in their rental units. And then also just to note that, just underscoring that the Clean Heat Standard is designed largely to do one thing, which is to require fossil fuel heating providers for the first time to help customers cut costs and carbon pollution. But it's not, no single policy solves every issue. So I think the sort of the renter and the sort of what they call the split incentive when it comes to renters and landlords is a big, important issue. And I think there are other ways to address it that may be an important complement to this policy. There's things I think that we can do through the Clean Heat Standard, and I think there's other things that we can and should be doing.
Joanna, can I have a question for you? I know 2-3 years ago, I don't know if it was your organization, but when the Climate Council was putting together their information, they had different meetings across the state to get people's input. I'm wondering if there's, when this law is in effect, will there be some sort of meetings on that same scale to bring people together to understand it better? Do you remember, do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so. And that's Curtis, that's his team doing this really good, important work. And maybe, Curtis, I don't know what your team is thinking about in terms of ensuing public engagement, but it does make me think of like the potential study that's going to come out from the Public Service Department will help assess, is this possible? Do we have the workforce, as Jean spoke to, what will it cost? And that will roll out in the fall, and that might be another opportunity for the consultant team to engage people with more information in those kinds of broader public engagement opportunities that I think you're speaking to, Joanne.
Yes.
Right. And as far as our team, we're looking at these first 3 Zoom calls as one way to get our feet wet, and then to map out the rest of the strategy afterwards. So who we have here? Looks like, is that Matthew? No. Where are my glasses?
I think it's me.
Yes, Matthew, you're the top left-hand corner of my screen.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Matthew with the Department of Public Service. I just wanted to attempt to answer some of the questions that I heard come up. And actually, first I'd like to provide a few resources. If you haven't seen in the chat, the PUC has a website. It's https://puc.vermont.gov/CHS-overview. That's the PUC's website that gives an overview of the Clean Heat Standard rulemaking procedures. The Department of Public Service has a similar page, but it's got to focus on the department's participation in the development of this rule. So to distinguish the commission's role as overseeing and directing the development and the department's participation therein. And then I also wanted to say that the department has a dedicated email address for questions that we can answer. It's psd.cleanheat@vermont.gov. So if you have questions for the department, we're happy to take them there. As far as Stephen's question with respect to detailed anonymized fuel sale data by town or county, currently, as I understand it, the Act does not provide for that information to be collected, but it could hypothetically be amended in the future to include that accounting. And then someone mentioned battery storage potentially as a clean heat measure. As written, the Act does allow for custom measures. So basically anything that's not enumerated in the Act that would fit within the definition of a measure, which is the avoidance of emissions, to oversimplify, can be treated as a measure and therefore earn credits. Likewise with thermal storage, which hasn't been mentioned, but there is a way for new measures to be added to the program, and that could happen within the first year. You would just need somebody to do the math to say, here's how much, carbon emissions or carbon emission equivalents are being avoided. And then I think the last thing was a NETS situation where, it's difficult to electrify a cabin in the woods, and propane has been a good solution for a long time. I don't think the market is there yet, but we are anticipating a market, we being, I think, society at large, are anticipating a market where renewable fuels are readily available. The question is the price and the volume of those fuels. So biopropane, for example, I believe would be able to run on your system as is once that market stands up. But again, we can't know that for sure. And there may be other demands that pull those fuel sources away to other even more difficult to electrify situations. So hopefully that's helpful. Sorry that I don't have any definitive answers for everybody, but I wanted to provide that feedback.
Great, thank you very much for that. We're gonna do Gretchen, then Ashley, then Jeremy.
Hi, thanks. I've been thinking, I've been listening to some of the comments about where and how and about what the public could be weighing in, and thinking about my own experience as a community member. I was a renter in Burlington and Montpelier for about 15 years before becoming a homeowner. That was a long time ago, and the renting market has gotten a lot tighter since I was a renter. But in terms of my own experiences as a renter, I think the thing that strikes me is that I didn't have choices in terms of what kind of heating system I remember one year where I was only renting for one heating season, and I couldn't afford to refill my oil tank at the end of the heating season because I wasn't going to be able to recoup that. And so I spent, a good part of March under multiple blankets on my couch because I was leaving the heat off. And so thinking about ways to make, the actual heating costs of a rental unit more transparent upfront, to incentivize landlords that make that more of a partnership and a shared conversation with tenants. I think that's tough to do right now when probably tenants have even fewer choices than when I was renting. But that's the big thing that comes out to me when I was renting, is that I just didn't have I didn't feel like I had options or choices. And now as a homeowner, I know I care about the climate. I want to get our household off fossil fuels. And I know I have choices, but they're just so overwhelming to me So that there's so many different things and trying to figure out which ones we can afford. So the cost is a huge part of it, but also which ones are going to be the best value, are going to be right for our house. Wood isn't even an option for us because of the layout of our house. So that's even, that's off the table. So different ways of having help navigating all the choices. So I'm glad that Joey put in the chat that Rewiring America calculator. A resource like that, building out on that, I've already used that actually as a homeowner to check and see if I, am aware of all the incentives available to us. But also, like, I use the word navigator specifically because I think we had navigators for Obamacare too. Like, I think a lot of people would benefit from having a person who walks through their options with them. And I know my husband's become an unofficial navigator for EV shoppers because he did an inordinate amount of research on EVs. And so all of our friends call him and ask him, and he's done all that research, and he asks them what they're looking for, what their price points are, what their needs are, and he'll talk them through. And I from the point of view of an average Vermonter, I think a lot of people are going to need multiple ways to help navigate their own system. So those are my thoughts from as a community member, what would make this work best for the average Vermonter.
Great. I love the suggestion of a navigator. So now for Burlington, is there a tenants union in the Burlington area or not? Does anyone know? Okay, Ashley. Ashley?
Sorry about that. My goodness. I know this isn't the question you asked, but time is running short, and I wondered, while we have PUC folks present, if I could find out if there will be a reckoning during this process in terms of accurately accounting for greenhouse gas emissions from all sources, including from wood.
My name is Tom Nauer. I work for the PUC. So two places that will happen. One, the technical advisory group needs to establish a method for looking at life cycle emissions of all heating fuels. So your traditional fossil fuels, electricity, and then any type of fuel that could itself be used as a clean heat measure. So technical advisory group, and also the commission has hired a technical consultant who will be doing technical analysis of all clean heat measures and producing a document there and called a technical reference manual. And that again will be based on the life cycle emissions of all potential measures. And that again will be, I suspect that the consultants' work as well as the technical advisory group's work there will be opportunities for public engagement to get feedback from you and others who are interested in the topics.
It looks like Curtis may have dropped off, but Jeremy has had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, Jeremy.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to a few things several people have said with like a culmination and something I think would be useful in the clean heat standard. So Hannah mentioned underutilized incentives, and Gretchen had mentioned situations where you don't have any choice of what your fuel source is. I experienced that too when I lived in Burlington. We had like a Renai propane heater that cost us like $1,000 a month to keep our apartment at like 50 degrees, something like that. It was a funny situation. But so taking those concepts, and what I see working with people in my region. So I work with energy committees. I do energy planning in the Rutland region. I work with energy committees that are trying to get people to weatherize their homes and adopt various energy technologies. And it's really challenging. I think that part of what doesn't work with our system of incentives and why they can be underutilized is that there's very much people are, from what I've heard from people in our region, lots of people are overwhelmed. They like don't have time to become an expert on anything, or even like they want to know that their house is going to be warm in the winter. That's like the extent of concern with heating for people that are working multiple jobs or have kids or are, for whatever reason, have limited capacity to deal with one more thing in life. And so I feel like part of our incentive situation in the state that I've seen outside of the clean heat standard is limited accessibility. And there's like an equity perspective where we say, okay, here's all these incentives. Good luck, go figure it out. So you're basically left on your own, and it's this like you have to take individual action with little to no help, and basically in a bubble or in a silo rather. District heating systems have been mentioned. I feel like that would be a great thing to incorporate where appropriate into the clean heat standard more, where so like if you think about natural gas pipelines, people get natural gas heating because the pipeline's there, not because they had to do a lot to get the pipeline there. Like some outside entity determined, hey, it'd be economically viable to put a pipeline in here. But so having those group actions within the clean heat standard, I think would be great. And I recognize it's not appropriate and available for every situation. Like bringing district heating to Annette's place probably isn't going to make any sense financially for anybody. But within our like consolidated downtowns and village centers, I feel like there should be a strong effort within the clean heat standard to work on these thermal energy network district heating systems that allow people to participate in the savings of those types of systems without having to take their personal time and energy to really understand the situation. And I'm not saying keep people in the dark about what's going on. I think that would involve a lot of public engagement and public education. But I do think within the clean heat standard, incorporating implementation through group actions rather than these, here's a list of incentives, good luck, go figure it out. I'll leave it at that.
So what sort of groups do you see implementing these actions? Private, government, quasi?
Yeah, it could really be any of those. I mean, maybe, and that's where communities have more of a choice in that. Like some communities might say, hey, we have a district water system. We could easily run a district heating system. Other communities would say, we struggle to run our district sewer system or our district water system. We have no more administrative capacity to take on a district system. And that's where maybe the state government could step in or a private entity could step in. So I don't really have a specific, this is exactly how that has to work, but I do see a huge opportunity within, there'd be a variety of frameworks for making that work. And each town that I work with is very different. So like we have some towns where the town administration is one person who works 3 days a week. And then we have towns where there's like large staffs of people who like can dedicate, they could have an entire staff dedicated to just running the water system. And so I think that's where there's not a one size, it's private entities that do this, or it's the municipality, or it's the state that does it. I think that would depend more on the specific situation that you're looking at. And then I mean, that idea of like district systems specifically would exclude people that are not living close enough to be on a district system. So I think something would need to be done to address that. And I can't think of anything right now off the top of my head, but there might be ways to participate in group actions within those more rural communities that are not just this idea of figure out how to navigate the incentive system and figure out how to like research what kind of a really expensive system you need to put into your house, because not everybody has that either time or cognitive ability or whatever it might be that's a barrier that yeah, I feel like that's where I see the biggest barrier is people being kind of just left on their own to figure it all out.
Okay, great. Aaron.
I'm mostly just following up on this. How can we help you figure out the incentives? I hear have somebody, some actual person who can serve as a resource, have things in one place, like with the calculator. Are there any other things that people can think of that would be useful in figuring out for themselves how they could take advantage of an incentive? And if we've covered all of them, that's fine.
Or if you can imagine creating new ones.
So that doesn't need to stop the conversation, but I am still interested in hearing about that as we go.
Okay, good. Matthew.
Yes. Yes. To answer the questions, most, innovations, but I heard that, with newer technologies like and I agree with Johanna Miller on this, that with new technology like the pellet stoves, we could have nutrition labels for the wood stove pellet stoves too as well. So we'll be able to know how much, efficient they give off, but also it's just, with incentives, like you said, it's unless you're very, very tech heavy or smart, very, very smart, it's going to be hard for the demographics of Vermont to come to comprehend of what we say. Believe me, we are the second, third oldest state with senior citizens, veterans population, and we're basically telling them, learn this, or telling them, oh, here's the resources. Like the person from Rutland, says he's right. It's like do it yourself type of situation where we're supposed to be doing this together as a community. And it's just, that's what our efficiency lies in, is working together, collaborating together with communities and making sure that the information like these incentives, it should be plug and play. It should be 1, 2, 3, have an instruction that says 1, 2, 3. You don't have to go like through like 10 pages to get that incentive. It should be, accessibility and accommodating, like Jeremy says, it should be, easy for people that from different perspective views to access this. And we just make it too complex and technicality to a point that nobody wants to participate because we're not seeing them as who they are. And that's the reason why we don't have very many participations, or nobody wants to participate, because we assume that everybody here is smart. And that's not the case. And that's just hurting Vermont as a whole. And we got to do better. We got to be better than what we are doing right now. And that's what equity and inclusion lies in, moving forward together. Thank you very much.
Okay. Let's see here, Johanna.
Oh, geez, it's hard to follow that. That's really thoughtful. And Matthew, I appreciate that sentiment a lot. And I totally agree. It needs to be a collaborative approach. And I think there are ways to do better. And I definitely would welcome a brainstorm on what that could look like with others who would be interested. And just to underscore like the sort of navigator piece of it, so that people who are busy, don't have time in their lives, don't have interest, but still want to stay warm, get where they need to go, and that sort of thing, can make better decisions and get financial support to do that. There's tools like that calculator, but this sort of role of navigation is something that we've been talking about and more people are talking about, and there is a need. And as people know, I hope so, that that is embedded in our community action agencies who are really critical partners to Vermonters in so many ways. They have a financial and energy coaching system that low-income Vermonters can lean into and call an energy coach and help them make decisions and access incentives. And so that sort of model scaled up is important. And I'm hoping there may be money to do that in another bill. I think that should be on the table for as a sort of a support structure to the clean heat standard. And sort of side note on the sort of promise, sorry, there's like a little party going outside my work window right now, if you can hear it in the background. Apologies. But that like this concept of thermal energy networks is really important. I agree that it is a potential opportunity, and there's a bill that I hope will move forward and enable that at the community level this legislative session, because there's opportunity in that, and then that will help us get off of fossil fuels for heating. So, and just wanting to, you know, sort of say the last thing in terms of like appreciating the opportunity to come to the table, have conversations, and hear from you all. Thank you, Curtis, and your team for doing the public engagement and trying to find ways to bring more Vermonters into the conversation, and just sort of underscoring and like elevating, you know, the legislature is advancing a clean heat standard not to like punish people and raise their costs. Like the goal is to, because our thermal efficiencies, our thermal sector is our second most polluting sector, and it's largely fossil fueled, and we import all of that fossil fuels. We have an opportunity and an obligation to help people save money and cut their carbon pollution because we have a climate crisis. And if we don't do that now and help people save money now, but also think about young people and future generations, then we're just punting the cost of doing too little, too late to young people and future generations. So my hope is, yes, this is a complex policy. We've done performance standards in the past. I'm optimistic that we can do it, but we have to come to the table with constructive solutions, meeting people where they are, recognizing that most Vermonters have a major capital fossil-fired investment in their basement, and we need to transition them off of these things as quickly as possible. So thank you so much for the time and opportunity. I look forward to the last comments.
Yeah, there's I have a question to ask about energy credits. Currently, as it's written, the energy credits go to obligated actors, fuel dealers, HVAC installers, you know, those that convert, you know, to biofuel. They get to earn energy credits. Should individual homeowners and renters accrue credits? And if so, how would they monetize those credits? Because
I can attempt to answer that. So it's being determined in the rulemaking. There are, I'll over summarize by saying there are two perspectives on credit ownership. One is that the entity that is implementing the measure itself. So let's say you have an HVAC contractor or a fuel dealer who is providing you with a renewable fuel, that party would be the recipient of the credit. The other position is that a property owner would be the default recipient of a credit, and then the parties can negotiate in a contract who's going to end up with a credit in the end. But that is an active discussion that's happening at both the equity and technical advisory groups.
And then how do those credits get monetized?
Eventually, there will be a market for credits, sort of like we have for renewable energy credits. And essentially, there will be an economic value and a moral value. There's also a regulatory value to these things. So one form of monetization could be in the cost of a non-compliance payment that an obligated party who is required to implement clean heat measures has to pay in the event that they fail to implement enough measures in a year. There are potential tiers in the values of these credits. For example, there could be higher credit values for credits provided to people of low income, There's also the potential, and ultimately, if enacted, there will be a market where supply and demand determine the price of credits. So it's complicated, but hopefully that kind of gives an idea of the credit generation, ownership, and trading process.
Okay. That your answer speaks to Matthew's comments about making things simple. Because the energy credit marketplace at this point sounds like it's a really complicated concept to wrap our heads around.
Admittedly, this is complicated.
Yeah. Okay, who else? Joanne.
Oh, I was just commenting about, Joanne was making the comments about the thermal networks, and I'm very excited about that in terms of it relating to the ability of a municipality or town to possibly allow them to run a thermal network system like they would, their town water or their sewer water or like that. And I think it's a very exciting opportunity, I think. And I'm watching for that to be something that where in our town we could do such a thing and marry it, like I was saying before, to the needs of the housing community, so that if you're building new housing, you build new schools, whatever you're building in that regard, that these thermal networks are a big part of that planning system.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that's going to come to fruition.
Okay. All right. It's 3:30. We have 2 more comments, and then we'll close it out. Okay, so Jean.
Yeah, thanks. So getting back to the idea of the energy navigators, as I've been working on trying to stand up a program like this for the last year, I think a couple of the critical elements have been that, as Jeremy Gildren said, there's a lot of towns out there that don't even have any capacity for any energy coordinators, much less an energy committee. And so they're really starting from nothing. And it's hard to even get a group together who's, ready to think about, oh, how can we help our town work on these issues? So I do think that developing a closer network of people who are, in the neighborhoods of people where they're going to be served is going to be critical to helping people make this transition.
Great. All right. Thank you. And then our last comment, or the next to the last comment, will come from Annette, and I'll give the closeout.
Speaking of capacity, on the human level, I'll note that just about everyone I encounter these days is dealing with some sort of personal or professional problem where they just don't have the capacity for much extra things. But on the energy side, it's some of the comments have made it sound like, oh, simple, people just have to get a heat pump. They just have to electrify. And I direct you to the Green Mountain Power 2.0 solar map, which shows, for instance, in my area, tremendous lack of capacity in the grid. So look at Paulet, look at the whole western side of Rutland County. New Haven has lines that are overloaded about 56%. The cost, and this is something that I think we really need to be concerned about, that the document that Dominic posted says that this is going to raise the cost of fossil fuels. So while I may be unique living off grid, I am not unique in using propane. And I'm finding myself in the position of really wanting to point out that a lot of people live in a rural way and not in a community center. And so this idea of district heating where it can work, fine. I've been a big fan of microgrids for a long time.
Mhm.
But I'm afraid there's a real equity issue that is, I don't know if it's really being looked at or not, but that rural Vermonters can't be left behind here. And in many respects, our grid is a key part of it, and it's going to be very expensive to upgrade. There's a recent discussion about transmission costs over the renewable energy standard. And in public records I got from Joint Fiscal Office, a consultant from the Regulatory Assistance Project said that if the distribution costs were included, that would be a high cost, but they didn't include them in the memo. And so that didn't go into the discussion about the renewable energy standard. But the distribution system is not something to ignore. So thank you for doing this, Curtis, and I appreciate your work on this.
Great. I'd like to thank everyone. We are developing a sense of community wisdom around this topic, and we'll carry that forward. And we will post this session online in the coming weeks so that you have your own personal records of what you said. All right. That being said, enjoy the rest of the day. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Curtis.
Thank you, Curtis.